Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Real Squawk, episode 6. Today, we're going to be discussing breeding, success, and challenges. I'm Jordan Daniel.
I'm Lisa Bolstad.
I'm Jason Crean.
And I am Tiffany.
She's Tiffany Park, but she just froze.
Oh my God.
We can restart it.
We've all got lots of questions about breeding, and some of us have bred birds for many years. Some of us have gotten birds from breeders, and so we thought it would be a good way to a good topic to tackle. Obviously, you can't capture everything that goes into aviculture in one episode, so stay tuned for things that we miss talking about in further episodes. But the first question that when people are looking to start breeding, I ask is, why do you want to breed? And knowing what goes into the care of birds and always focusing on their welfare is always paramount. Birds aren't going to breed if you're not focused on their welfare. You can't cut corners. And breeding is the most natural thing that your birds can do. Reproduction is the biological imperative. All organisms on Earth, that is the number one drive, is to reproduce and pass on their genes. And so this is a natural process that we want to observe and facilitate in the healthiest way possible. So I started with cockatiels when I was 12, and I found a mentor that taught me all kinds of things, and that's where it all started for me, and really what got me to go into biology and go to school to study that and so on. So how did you all start? Tiffany, how did you get started?
I started with Goldien finches. So actually, my story is probably a lot different from most people's. I had birds. I mean, this part isn't different, but I had birds growing up my whole life, and I always had cockatiels. And then I was in my senior year of college, and my cockatiel from my childhood passed away. And I kind of knew based on my class schedule that I didn't have the bandwidth to take on a bird that needed like attention and affection. So I went into Carol's Critters pet store in Tallahassee, and she had a pair of Goldien finches, and I saw the male like doing the mating dance to the female. And I thought, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. I have to have them. If you've never seen what it looks like, it's literally just the most ridiculous courtship dance. They kind of like shake their heads at the female, and then they just start jumping up and down on the perch. And I just thought it was adorable. So I got this pair, and then I just became quite obsessed with them. I started reading everything about them. I started learning that they came in different genetic mutations, and I got really fascinated with that. And so one turned into 2 pairs, turned into 50 pairs. And then I started showing them because I knew going into it that if I was going to be breeding, I wanted to be breeding towards a goal. And so I wanted to be breeding towards a standard. And so I was showing my birds to make sure that the birds that I was producing were actually of, standard. And yeah, that's how I got started. And then I, moved down here and started working with parrotlets and the kakarikis, and everything for me has always been about producing high quality, birds that I consider to be of a specific standard. So Lisa knows this. I like nice all round heads that I breed for. And yeah, not for money, because I don't make any money. And I think that's what gets to me, is that I think that seem to think that because they see me selling a bird for such and such price, that they're like, wow, I could do this and I can make money. And they're quickly just, oh, I got a pair of or I got a parrotlet, I think it'd be cool to breed it, tell me all you know. And those are the people that I have to of really ask, you know, what's your intention? You know, if you just think it's cute and like, if you just think the babies are cute, I don't know that that's the best reason. Or if it's, you think that you can quit your job and make, you know, tons and tons of money selling baby birds, it's not realistic.
Yeah. With me, it's kind of the same thing with, you know, that you experienced, Tiffany. I've always been drawn to birds. I've always been attracted to them. I think I said in an earlier episode that my grandmother, I was always around her, and she always kept canaries and parakeets, small stuff, you know, the more common stuff. And I just remember not being able to divert my attention away from the birds. You know, every time I went over her house, I was always in the backyard with the chickens. I was always staring at the birds, you know, just sitting there. I would grab a chair and literally sit there and stare at them, you know. So I started with budgies, finches, zebra finches, cockatiels. I went into lovebirds. And then throughout my teens, I kind of, you know, I was going through a lot in my teens, so I didn't really have, you know, the, I guess the passion for it at that period in time. And then once I got out of high school and I moved away for a little bit and I lived with roommates, you know, I started to get into them again. You know, I bought a couple cockatiels and stuff like that. And going back to me being, you know, younger, I also, every time I went to Barnes and Nobles, because we would go to Barnes and Noble all the time, I'd always go to, you know, the pet section, you know, the pet bird section, and they'd have all these books, you know, on different species. And I would always buy them and I'd take them home and I'd read them. You know, that was before everything was available on Google, you know, or the internet, so to speak. So I was always reading those books, and that's how I, you know, that's where I got my information. I had no idea that there was this whole community of people out there that actually bred this stuff, and even the more exotic species and larger species. I had no idea, and was just kind of I had a foot in the door. So, you know, once I opened that door, there's this whole community and there's this whole world behind all of it. And, you know, now looking back at that, there's no way that I pictured myself even being where I am today and having what I have. So for me, it's always just been about passion. Yes, there's money involved when, you know, you breed something and you sell it as a pet. When I'm buying something from another breeder, or whether that breeder is buying something from me, there is money involved. So it's not, but that's not what it's all about. Of course, we need to make money to spend money. And by spending money, you know, I'm going to spend money on what else I want to work with. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. And I'm sure we'll get into it later, but you know, the stigma that all breeders are bad because they gain, you know, they gain monetary, you know, gain in value or whatever, that we're evil. And that's not even half the truth. You know, it's more
love
about
to break even someday.
right. Yeah, exactly. You know, as soon as I get paid, it's like that money's gone because I have to feed the aviary, you know, or if there's a pair of birds or even a single bird that I'm even looking at, you know, or if one pops up and I just can't pass it up, I'm going to spend that money, you know. So that's besides the point. The money is just a small fraction of this entire thing. So you know, that's how I started out, and that's my little 2 cents on the whole, you know. Breeders are a bad thing. So
Yeah, I think it's easy to demonize a group of people, and that's bigotry. So anytime I tell people, you know, if you're going to label an entire group of people as the same, that's bigotry, and it's inappropriate no matter how you're phrasing this. But yeah, I mean, I don't see anything wrong with making money, but knowing that I put 100% of that back into my animals, knowing that, and I'm never going to break even. I spend too much on them, but that's my choice. And so there's definitely nobody ever getting rich on this stuff for sure.
No.
And, you know, I've been to other countries to see what, you know, how they're breeding their birds and things like that. So we have a lot to learn from each other, and that's why we keep improving our welfare and how we move it forward. And Lisa hasn't bred birds, but she's part of the conversation because she's gotten some. So she'll jump in later, I'm sure, unless you want to say something now. But
No.
yeah. But so education and really regardless of whether you're going to be breeding birds, whether you're going to get a pet bird, whether you're rehoming a bird, whether you are setting up a rescue or sanctuary, the biggest problem we see among all of these people is a lack of education, and that has to change. And that education is one of the reasons we're doing things like this with the podcast, but you know, really focusing on learning and not perpetuating myth. We see tons of myths. I remember I was at a rehoming outfit, and they were talking to the general public and saying that tree nuts are nothing but fat and are unhealthy for all birds. And I was just like, oh my God, like that's the absolute false statement. And so if you're going to be putting birds out into the general public, whether you're a breeder or rehoming them, whatever, education matters. And I've learned more from the breeders that I have met all over the country and have been to their properties, have seen their setups, have seen their unbelievably healthy birds. And that's where I've learned the most over time. And I think that's where a lot of what we know about the birds that we have has come from breeders. And I'm very grateful for that. And I think that, you know, we all breed different birds. And so knowing that species natural history is important. What do they do in the wild? What have they evolved to do? You can't just change that when you bring them into a managed situation like your aviary. So what are some of the things that your birds specifically you have to pay attention to that may be different from others?
I mean, I can go first.
Go ahead.
I think that, you know, for me, I have some birds that are flocking species. So I think the kakarikis are flocking species, and they do fine in like the big aviary together. But something like the parrotlets, you know, they have to be kept pair separated their whole lives. They're not a bird that you can colony breed successfully just because they're absolutely way too aggressive. So I think knowing that and understanding that that is going to carry with it a certain amount of space requirement, because you have to have an individual cage for each pair. So making sure that, you know, you have enough space, and then with the kakarikis also, they're ground foragers. So they scratch like chickens. So being prepared for that and understanding that with that comes a degree of waste and mess, and, you know, trying to kind of find ways to limit that waste, so that I'm not spending $1 million on bird food every single month. But I think that's important. But also, I put the genetics on here because this is a conversation piece that comes up all the time. And there was just recently a discussion on one of the kakarikis about breeding turquoise together, and why a lot of breeders to do it. And it doesn't have anything to do with there being something intrinsically wrong with the mutation itself. And I mean, you can look at Quakers, Conyers, breed turquoise to turquoise and a whole bunch of other species, and no one says anything about it. But for some reason, it's this hot topic among kakarikis and parrotlets that it's like, really, you're not supposed to do it. Like you can't do it. Everyone says from everything from it produce weak babies, they're disease ridden, they don't live as long. And all of this is just anecdote, which you guys know. But for me, like when I'm trying to educate people, if they're interested in breeding, I typically don't pair blue series parrotlets together. And that's just because for me, in my experience, I've gotten bigger babies that way. But with the Kakarikis, I think it is a little bit different. And I know, Jason, you'll probably disagree with me, but I just think because of how recently they were imported and the fact that everyone who imported them just immediately bred them together because it was a cash cow. And it was like, this is how I'm going to make money. I'm going to produce them as fast as possible, breed them together, and it bottlenecked the genetics. So the birds that we have that came from these like line bred turquoise birds are actually quite a bit smaller than they are in the UK. Like by 20 grams, birds are smaller. And I can see that with the Spangle line that was just recently imported, and just being able to we see the size difference between those birds and the birds that I have. Anyway.
Well, but that, and I don't disagree with you, because how you explained it is when you're perpetuating a mutation is most when it emerges, the others of its relatives are more likely to have that mutation than anybody else in the population, right? So we tend to people that are trying to perpetuate that new mutation will then line breed or inbreed with siblings, which sounds terrible, but it's not. It's okay. They don't come out with 6 wings and 12 legs. That's not how it works. Because then they're outbred to unrelated individuals. And so like all the livestock and crop plants and things like that we eat today, all of them were a result of inbreeding, line breeding, all of the selective breeding. All of that is that. So it's not, it's rare that you would have anything harmful show up. But breeding them, if it's a fairly new mutation, yes, the gene pool's pretty small of those ones that have that color mutation. So you want to avoid breeding those together. But biologically speaking, unless there is a gene that's linked to that color that is harmful, which is very, very rare in animals in general, there's a color mutation in chinchillas, for example, that's linked to a lethal gene. And so you don't breed those colors together because they will abort their babies spontaneously. So those types of things exist, but in birds we don't see those, and a color mutation itself isn't going to impact the overall health of a bird and make it a genetically weak bird. Like there's no such thing. It's kind of like saying people with blue eyes are weaker than people with brown eyes. I mean, it's just a fallacy. So
I mean, my eyes are naturally more sensitive to the sun, but
yes, but you're not. It doesn't make you an overall weak individual either. So
yeah, that's just because I'm a woman.
Yeah.
I have a question on that, because you do hear that a lot, especially in rescue and rehoming, that the mutations are not going to live as long and they're not going to be as strong, and that people should quit breeding mutations because it impacts the longevity of the bird. That's not true?
No.
Good.
I have been seeing that stuff more and more as of late. I don't know where it's coming from, but yeah, there's been this I don't know any specific groups, but scrolling through Facebook, you do see conversations like this arise. So it's what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense.
I've heard since, at least 10 years since I first started volunteering in rescue, and I've even heard vets say that. Oh, well, it's a pineapple conure, so it's not going to live as long as a normal green cheek conure. I mean, seriously.
It's sad. That's really sad.
Then you hear a vet say that, you figure that must be true.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times people just, we talked about this in the very first episode, people just parrot things that they hear. When I was breeding Gouldians, the biggest thing that people would claim is that blue Gouldian finches didn't like process or synthesize vitamin D, I think it was, because the blue mutation is the absence of carotenoids in the feathers, keratins. And so there was this basic claim that because that pathway couldn't synthesize that carotenoid pigment, that it was linked how in vitamin A deficiency and like all this stuff. But there was no proof, but people say it over and over and over again. And then blues together, because then it's lethal. The babies will die because they can't, they can't produce or synthesize or whatever vitamin A, or they have vitamin A deficiencies. And, the only way to get them to be healthy is to put them outside in sunlight for like 30 minutes a day, every single day. It was very bizarre and very strange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I've heard these things a long time, and none of them are rooted in fact. They're rooted in, well, I knew somebody, or I saw this bird, that type of thing, but never like this is not biologically sound. So these things come out, and especially about genetics, it's amazing to me being on social media and seeing how little people actually know about genetic mechanisms and how they work. And it's pretty scary. But I think a lot of people will say, oh, but Lutino cockatiels have bigger bald spots. That doesn't make the bird a genetically weaker bird. I mean, male pattern baldness doesn't make a man of poorer quality. Shut up, Tiffany. Don't say it. But I mean, it just doesn't. It's a mutation that showed up, and it perpetuated itself in the population. So, and breeders are working towards improving that. That's why breeders who are doing this for show quality birds work towards those healthier bloodlines and things like that. So definitely things to consider. But people often say things because they want them to be true. And there's a lot of virtue signaling out there where they want to claim, oh well, I would never support this because, but it's often not founded in fact. So don't be one of those people. So that was cockerikis. What about lories and lorikeets?
Lories. For me, it's they basically,
right?
Right, yeah. Hybridization is a huge problem with lories, especially with the genus Trichoglossus. That's your rainbows, your green apes, your forstons, red collards. People think they all look the same, but really, if you look, you don't even have to look hard enough. It's just it's very apparent, between some species. Now you do have species like forstons and Mitchells that almost look identical, but the Mitchells doesn't have a scarlet chest. They have almost like a burnt orange chest. Their head color's got an olive tone to it, and they're actually very small compared to rainbows. They're short, stocky birds. So hybrids is I guess I'd put that up next to diet as being an issue. You have the diet, and then you have hybridization. Diet is a whole other ball game with them. You've got people that are just feeding them, not feeding them the way they shouldn't be fed, with pellets and all that. And I've said this in previous episodes as well. So for me, it's about feeding them correctly. You do have mate aggression with species. They will either pair up or they won't, or you'll have a pair that is completely fine, and then 1 minute they're going at it. So, and by that I mean they're fighting, and you do have a male killing a female or a female killing a male. I mean, as small as even the blue crowns will do it. Iris is a whole other thing too. They're very aggressive species. So for me, it's about being out there with them and watching them and making sure everything's good, no fighting going on. Being very observant is important too when you're breeding birds. You can have a bird that looks good 1 minute, and then by the end of the day or the next day, they're not looking too hot. They look sick. You know, they're sleeping. They've got the head tucked, you know, under the feathers. They're not eating as much. So being observant and having a good eye when it comes to breeding birds is super important. And you know, that's the other thing too, you know, going back to the whole money aspect. If that's all we cared about, we wouldn't care if we lost a bird, you know. And with lories in particular, so many species are hard to find. So if I didn't care about that stuff, why is it so hard for me to find a species I need? You know, if that was the case, if they're, you know, and so that there's not a lot of mutations when it comes to lories, so that's not really something I necessarily care about with them. They're, you know, the mutations that are out there are mostly hybrids between scaly breasted and rainbows. So they're, you know, they will always be a hybrid no matter what. Australia and Europe has some pretty cool mutations, you know, don't get me wrong, and I wish we had some of them. But the concern with doing that is just when you're making hybrids, you're making it much harder for everyone else to find a bird that they need, something that's pure. And you know, I said it the other day, who knows what we're going to have in the next 10 years if most of these species will even be around. So the population is another concern as well. So, but with lories, it's for me, they're not hard to take care of at all. You know, just make sure they've got fresh food at least twice a day. If you can't do fresh food twice a day, at least fresh nectar, wet nectar once a day. And I know people implement the dry powder in fruits. You know, there's ways to make it work. So I like to keep them in spacious flights as well, you know, because the food is nectar, it's, you know, sugar and carbohydrates. Giving them a good amount of space to move around and exercise and fly is important too, so they can burn off that energy and so they won't get fat. I also have cockatoos, so mate aggression it's the same thing with them. Giving them plenty of flight space for the females to get away from the males when the males are hormonal. So it's, my thing is just being observant of your aviary and your birds.
So what we have on the slide here on the left is a Kakariki, one of Tiffany's Kakarikis there. In the middle, that's a Duvenbodes lory, correct, Jordan?
Yes.
With those
yep.
beautiful, normal, fat feet. I love that picture.
Is that how you say their name? I never knew.
I say Duvenbode.
I thought it was Duvenbodes. The Y like throws me off. Like, why is the Y in there?
If you want to make it easy, you can just say brown lory, you know.
That's not as fancy.
So I know, right?
And then some of my Arasaris are on the right side there. And those are the small green Arasaris, smallest species in the toucan group. And you know, they're a whole different ball of wax. You know, they're soft built. They don't have crops. So you have to do measured feedings because you don't know when they're full based on their you know, morning body weights. You'll notice their tail is straight up in the air because they have a muscular joint and they actually sleep with their tail up like that for their whole lives. They lean back. I might have a picture later, but they lean back on this little non-skid pad that's that only chicks have, and it gets reabsorbed on their legs, and that helps them, you know, kind of stay in that at the bottom of the tree trunk where they're you know, being fed by their parents. I actually had somebody contact me once and say, my vet said that these birds must have been kept in deplorable conditions because they have this weird pad on, this weird irritation on their leg. I'm like, has your vet ever seen a toucan before? That is completely normal. You know, so, you know, vets are trained at medicine and surgery. but they need continuing education as well. So, you know, make sure when you're looking for a vet, you talk to a vet that has you know, pursued that extra education when it comes to birds. You know, but these birds and toucans don't produce down feathers either. And I've got a picture later that will show you that. So, you know, they're not plucked. They actually just don't produce down feathers. None of the toucans do. So their feathers come right out of that pink skin. And these are hard to find too. It's hard for me right now to source unrelated individuals. It's I've got a single female who I really want to pair. And she really wants to be paired, but she, you know, I can't find a unrelated male for her. So it's rough. It's really rough. But you know, these wean by 8 weeks. They make great pets and education program animals. You know, but they're frugivores. So, you know, they're eating mostly fruit, some insects, but you know, they're hard to source. So it's like Jordan said, it's hard to find them. We breed them in spacious flights as well. They have, you know, floor to ceiling of, you know, at least 8 to 10 feet tall, and they have, you know, they like to hop back and forth and fly. So we give them lots of space to do that. And we'll talk about some of their breeding setups as well. But there's those Steubenbodes lories. That's what they look like. They're beautiful.
Doing their thing.
Doing their thing.
No shame. They let me take a picture and everything.
Yep.
Why is my bird riding the other one's back?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, whenever someone asks me like what kind of breeding setup, my answer is always the same. The bigger, the better. You know, there's a lot of myth that you should keep certain species in small cages in the dark and all this sort of thing. It's like that is not true. You know, birds should have space. You know, they're animals that like to move, and they should be able to do that. So like Jordan said, he has spacious flights, and you have all suspended flights, so they're off the ground, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's great for cleaning and everything else, keeping things clean.
Right.
And then the third picture over is I've got a really large, long zebra colony that's about 200 zebra finches, and you know, we have all kinds of nests up, and we use them to experiment with things, nothing that would harm them, of course, but this is a little shelving unit that you would hang on a wall to put things on, and we added some wood and to see if they would use this kind of apartment living, because it was more solid and, you know, easier to contain chicks, and they love it. They're thriving with that, so that's helped quite a bit. And we use this population for nutrition studies as well. So zebras are a really great bird to use for those types of things, because they can adapt to a lot of different environments. And then the last picture is just my big main aviary that's about 20 feet high, almost 60 feet long, and it's well planted. And I have different types of finches and fruit doves and Nicobar pigeons, some ground birds, like different types of quail, Sulawesi ground doves now, which is really exciting, and things like that. So what we have found is that vine, that passion flower vine that has taken over half the aviary, which is covering the roof, we have found that birds are loving it. We have found at least 4 nests up there that they've constructed themselves. We had our first Brazilian red-crested cardinal breeding up there. Didn't even know they had a nest until shortly before it fledged, because they're good at hiding these things. But giving birds choice, I think, is awesome if you can do that. When it comes to breeding nest sites, you know, we have all kinds of pre-constructed nests out there, and yet they still want to breed. They still want to produce their own. So it's always an experiment, and it's a lot of fun. Colony breeding, you know, some things you can colony breed. I have a colony of owl finches out there, some wax bills. and that sort of thing, as well as like the Nicobar's. I always want more than one pair of Nicobar pigeons out there. But like Jordan said, some of them need individual breeding flights, and you know, Tiffany said the same thing about her parrotlets. And the Arasaris are the same way. So I can't have Arasaris out here. They have to go in their own flights that I have on the periphery of this one, so that they're kept in individual pairs, because they can be aggressive with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody want to?
Looks really nice.
I have like a hybrid setup. So I have my aviary that's outside is, I think, 12 by 17 by like 8 feet at the tallest. And I have strawberry fences, were they variegated seed eaters? What kind of seed eaters did we get? Wing barb seed eaters? Wing barb seed eaters.
Yeah.
And then the non-breeding kakarikis are out there because they are very mellow and get along with everything. And then I have some button quail and some Coturnix quail that are like the garbage disposals of the aviary. And then what I do is I bring the kakarikis inside to breed, and I breed them currently in the cages that are to the right of the brown lories, since I can't say that name. And those are 36 by 20 by 20. So they're not in there all the time. They're only in there for the period of time that they're breeding, and done breeding, I cycle them back out to the aviary, assuming that it's not a time of year where I have to worry about acclimatizing them, acclimating them. So like if I pull a pair in the fall and then the temperatures start to drop really low, I'll just keep them indoors until the spring and then put them outside when I know there's not going to be any hard freezes. But otherwise, everything that I've had out there, I kind of just cross my fingers. Okay, I haven't lost anything out there due to cold or due to heat. But yeah, so that's my hybrid setup. And then all of my parrotlets stay indoors year round and breed indoors. And that's just because they can't be in a colony situation. What would you say the pros and cons would be between the different options? I mean, I think for me, a pro of the individual flight cages is that you can guarantee relatedness. So, whereas if I'm breeding, Golding finches are notorious for this. And a lot of people think that breeding them is fine, but the females are tarts and they will literally step out on their mate. It's funny, but I'm dead serious, because the amount of people who insist that they're monogamous and then contact me saying, hey, my two blue, how's that possible? And it's not, because that green baby is not from that pair. Either another female laid in their nest, or that female another male, because that's what they do. So if certain birds, if you're colony breeding them, you can't guarantee related. I would never feel comfortable selling someone an unrelated pair, because you just don't know. I mean, even with my quail, I have several males out there and several females, but I don't know what egg comes from who. So I have to just assume that they're all related in that case. But
yes, sneak matings in the natural world are extremely common, especially with smaller birds. And so, the male will take care of the female and the chicks if he thinks they're his. So, it's an advantage for her to encourage him to think that he's the dad. But sneak matings diversifies the gene pool, and that's a natural occurrence. Especially when breeding with these little birds can literally take 1 second, right? Like it's really fast and easy. So, and that's one reason
for something like 14 days too.
Say it again.
Sorry, the internet is just being a nightmare. No, they can store sperm for something like 14 days too. At least with the finches I know. So even if people have a pair together and they think they're not compatible and then they separate them, if they don't wait a period of time to make they hadn't been bred, then it's possible that she would still throw chicks from the prior mate, because they can store that sperm for a period of time.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I have to be really, really picky about what birds I'm introducing to my free flight aviary here. Mainly because of this issue. Like if I have 3 pairs of Boolean finches out there, I have to make sure that they're all unrelated because they may engage in sneak mating. I mean, that may happen. So, you know, I have to make sure that they're at least all unrelated, and then hope for the best.
Yep. I would say the con for me of the colony situation too, with the Kakarikis especially, is that they might pair up in the aviary, and they might pair up in a way that I don't want. So
Right.
then I have to try to actually intended to breed them. And I had fully intended on building a separate flight so that I could eventually separate my males from my females, but then the cost of lumber went up and COVID. So I haven't done that yet. But yeah, that was another con for me, is that I noticed sometimes that I would select pairs to bring inside to breed, and then I would realize they don't really seem to be meshing well, and I'm not seeing any behavior that leads me to believe that they're breeding. And then I realize it's because I had previously bonded with a different male or a different female. And it's just a matter of finding that female and bringing them in and kind of like trying things out until I see who's going to work.
Right. So I think we talked about all of this already, but you know, different needs for different species. So it's really important that you're doing research, you're networking and talking with other breeders who have experience. You know, Jordan, I know you did that at length with many different people when you were first getting into lorries, and you know, as did I. So you know, talking to those people and really learning about all of these different species and their vastly different needs. I have a lot of people who come to me with assumptions about, you know, how these different birds are to be kept based on their narrow view, based on just what they've had before. And, you know, there is a lot of education that has to occur. And one of them is nesting. And we've just, Tiffany and I have been on a journey to find appropriate nests and experiment with some things. You know, we're breeding Sierra parakeets now. We're two of a handful of breeders that have them in the US. We've got some pictures of them later. But you know, if I didn't do my due diligence, I would have given them a nest box similar to a similar species that I've raised in the past, like the linealated parakeet. But when we talked to the breeders who had successfully bred them and gave them a grandfather upright box, like what you see this Kakariki, and they all went to nest. So obviously that was successful. And then, you know, like the third picture over is a wire laundry basket with potted grasses in it. And it's suspended in my aviary, and I've seen the waxbills go in there and start to build nests. And some are carrying grasses out and building their nest elsewhere, and some are starting to hang out in there. We got that idea from an Instagram account out of Australia, but just really
Bones Birds,
yeah.
Bones Birds.
Just
Shout out Bones Birds.
Yes, really interesting experimenting with these different birds to see what they prefer. Because we want to give them what's most natural to them, what they've evolved naturally to nest in. And then the picture all the way to the right are what our Asaris breed in, and those are palm logs. And those are, we started off at the top hollowed out. We mount a small camera into the underside of the lid so we can see what's going on inside the palm log, but it's a natural process for the pair to bond through excavation. So they hollow out this log, they continue to dig, they carry all this stuff out and throw it out, and then that gets them excited for breeding. We've never had any success breeding them in anything but this. We've had people try to line the inside of like a plywood nest box with palm, and all kinds of things, but it's that digging that they really want to do in those palm logs. So
I even I saw a really interesting idea, and I can't remember where I saw it, but it was about certain species of parrots that may have a difficult time kind of getting in that breeding mood. And so with the nest boxes where they always typically have the entrance hole drilled out already, they put like cork wood over it, and that allowed to hollow out the entrance. And then they had like cork wood kind of just all on the outside that they could chew. So it was almost like a natural excavation process. And with the Kakarikis, since you mentioned that she's in that grandfather style box, this is the first year I've had really good success with them. And it was because I switched to these boxes. I had been using like 12 by 12 cockatiel boxes, and I was just having problem after problem with dead and shell eggs, because the females are just, first of all, they lay huge clutch. They lay between like 8 to 12 eggs a clutch. With the, it was almost, these are inches, and the smaller space keeps them kind of like, the smaller space and being deeper and darker and just like really tightly sat on their eggs. Whereas the smaller 12 by 12, I think too much light gets into those, and then they flush very easily. So they would flush from the nest box and then kick the eggs all over the place. And when they're in those breeding cages too, their toenails tend to get really long. So because they didn't have to slowly come back into the nest, they would literally just hop right back in. They would hop right on top of the eggs, and their toenails would like poke little whole eggshells. So last year I lost so many eggs, and this year I've got how many fledged babies over there? I think fledged babies, 3 that I had just recently pulled, and I've got 5 hatching currently. So it's just been crazy. I've never had this many babies before.
So Tiffany, do you remember asking me what I was using the shelving for in the grandfather boxes?
Yeah.
Was because I did have birds that would, as soon as I would go out there, they would dive in the box. So when they had eggs, I didn't want them diving in and plopping down on the eggs. So it prevents that, but it also adds added darkness for them to feel more secure. I have had a pair of rainbow lorikeets that absolutely will not go in their box because I have those shelves. So they were kind of like, oh, we can't see down towards the bottom. So I've had to switch that box out to an L shape to see if they like that box better. But even in an L shaped box, I've used L shaped boxes, and the pairs will move the eggs towards, I guess where the bottom and the L and the L part meet, if that makes sense. I don't know why I can't talk right now. So instead of being towards the back of the box, they're moving it towards the front where they'll go in and immediately sit on the eggs. So it's like, okay, that doesn't make much sense, but I guess it's a matter of trying out different things to see what works for what pair. Some pairs like different shapes of boxes. It's not a one size fits all, certainly. So yeah, but that's what I've been doing with the grandfathers, is just putting those shelves from 2x4s in. I cut them up into pieces and put them in there, so that way they don't just plop down on eggs.
So one of the questions is to hand rear or not, and in a perfect world, birds could raise their own young and we can socialize them and everything, but it's doesn't always work that way. I know with the Arasaris, like the one in the middle picture there, Arasaris they can be really iffy parents, and if they lay 4 eggs, there's a good chance that not all of them are going to make it to hatching. Parents are often egg eaters and sometimes chick eaters. And that happens in the wild too. That's not a managed problem. That is a wild problem. Most animals produce more offspring than they can raise, as insurance that some of their genes will continue. So it's not uncommon. We try to let the parents do as much as they can. But we pull most of our RSRs for hand rearing. And then, in the case of like the Sierras, we're hoping that we can let those pairs parent rear and go through the process themselves. And then, intervene if we have to.
I think for me, I've always hand fed with the pairlets and the kakarikis because I think that if I'm not holding back a baby, I would say probably 70% of them are going into pet homes. And handles to keep them tame while the parents are feeding them. I don't have time for that. So I, would prefer to pull them and hand feed them. With the kakarikis, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is that even if I hold them back for myself for breeding, the hand-fed babies are less psycho than the parent-reared ones. So they don't flip out as much when you're in there servicing their cage. They don't panic as much when you're checking their nest box. So they tend to be a little bit less flighty, a little bit less aggressive. And I see a lot of these myths that hand-fed babies won't successfully rear their own babies, which is false. I've never had a problem with that. Which makes no sense because 90% of large parrots are usually hand-fed, and that would mean that the entire population of large hand-fed pet birds is unhealthy. It's just not true.
Yeah, for my RSRs, I often will pair an RSRI, like a parent reared, with a hand reared bird. And the thing about hand reared RSRIs is the good news is they're not afraid of you. The bad news is they're not afraid of you. So so I have one individual of each pair who will sit there and like a velociraptor test the weakness in the fences and just wait for me. And that's okay because they seem to calm the pair down. They don't freak out every time I'm around. And that there seems to be a balance, but that's for that species. That doesn't mean that works for all species. And so knowing who's who and what they can do is important.
Right. With me, for the lories, it's just I hand feed mostly everything because everything is so hard to find now. Like the two black lory babies I just hatched, they're now like 3 weeks old, but from the pair from which they came, that pair all last year broke all of their eggs. She had like 4 clutches, and every clutch she broke the eggs. Before I can even get to them, I would look in the box and I'd just see eggshells everywhere. So it's just a matter of I guess, depending on the rarity of the bird or just that, the population, I pull most of the eggs that I find in the boxes and I just incubate them and hand rear them because I don't want them to disappear. So I'm just I feel more comfortable doing it myself than allowing most of them to try to rear their young. That's the point where we're at with these birds, and I know there are a couple of other breeders that have, black lories, yellow streaks, and Newfoundland boats, and they'll raise babies perfectly fine, but it just depends on, the pair. And who knows why they don't incubate or why they break their eggs. There are pet birds or ex-pet birds that will rear young, But then there's birds that were parent reared that will, you know, not incubate or rear young themselves. So for me, I just do it all, you know, other than the blue crown that I let, you know, be parent reared recently. So I was just kind of at the point where I'm like, I got enough babies to hand feed right now. So you guys go ahead and take care of it. And you know what? They did fairly, that baby's out of the nest now. He's eating nectar on his own and he's just learning everything he can from his parents. So yeah, it just, that's where I sit as far as the pros and cons. So, you know, if you've got a super rare bird and they're hard to find, you know, that they're almost gone, you should be doing everything you can to ensure you can, you know, hatch one and raise it.
Yeah, and a lot of conservation programs are, you know, do that because they want to maximize the numbers that they produce. And in aviculture right now, there's a lot of species that we just don't have a lot of. And, you know, we need to make sure that we have viable populations of them in managed situations, you know, in this country, just in case. I mean, we've seen it before. So,
yeah. But
yeah, so you know, guaranteeing some success when you have questionable parents is just part of the job.
Right.
So, and we have other things like formula quality and supplementation. Tiffany and I have been experimenting quite a bit with different types of whole food supplementation with the formula. I don't believe any formula that's out there is complete. I think that we need to be supplementing with whole foods, and we're looking at that. And we've produced chicks that are beautiful with supplementation. You know, and then different types of equipment, syringes, and you know, making sure things are clean and sterilized. And that type of thing is it's a big job. It's a really big job. And even though I'm breeding green arisaries that, you know, aren't tiny birds, I have to use a 1 cc syringe and feed them half a syringe at a time because they don't have a crop. They only can swallow so much at a time and things like that. So, you know, developing that and talking with breeders and developing those types of those protocols are really, really important.
I think that's one of the things that people that are anti-breeder, sorry, Jordan.
That's okay. You've been too quiet anyway.
I know, that's weird.
First time we've heard your voice.
I think that's one thing that people that are anti-breeder don't think about too, is if you don't have people out there that know how to do all this, when it does come down to saving kakapo or Spix's macaws or scarlet macaws, you know, you don't have anybody that can teach these conservationists how to do this. I know Hafet that works with the Puerto Rican Amazons. Whenever I see him at Parrot Festival, he always brings that up. You know, thank you so much to people in private aviculture that helped, you know, teach us how to do this. And this is a skill that you don't want to be lost. There should be lots of people knowing how to do this.
Yeah, and even you know, and I work with people who are in conservation and run conservation organizations, and what they've learned from private aviculture is what's saving species. And Bonnie Zimmerman from the Indonesian Parrot Project, I just love her to death. Wonderful conservationist. And she said, unless I bred birds previously and went through all of the process of learning all of these things, we would not have had the success that we've had. And so, you know, that coupled with understanding the natural history of the birds and what they're eating in the wild, which, you know, is of interest to me as well. All of that working together is what saves these species, period.
Well, and it should be of interest to anybody that owns a bird or to rescues as well. I mean, I'm listening to things like, oh, well, these species of lorikeets, you don't want to have them with other lorikeets, or you don't want to have parrotlets out with this. A lot of rescues have outdoor flights where the birds go during the day. Well, it's sounding like you probably don't want to put the iris lorikeets out with the budgies. Now, if you don't know anything about parrots, you might just look at the size and figure that's okay. Or the scratching with the food with the kakarikis. You know,
and for a long time,
why are they doing this? Why are they scratching all their food out of their bowls? Well, if you don't understand anything about species, which breeders can teach you, you're not going to do as well in your organization either.
Right. Yeah, and being open to learning from everybody. You know, that I have seen some real ignorance from, oh, well, I won't learn from that person. Well, you know, that's dreadful. That's arrogance. That's ignorance. And that has to stop, because ultimately the birds are the ones that suffer. And so, you know, you need to go where you have the, you know, big data sets, and the big data sets are going to come from breeders. Have experience with those species and are willing to work and teach.
Yeah. Even if people, a lot of the times it's like, it's not even that they're not wanting, maybe it is that they don't want to learn, but it's also a little bit, I've noticed with, you know, some particular people that we've had conversations with, where it's more like, I'm just going to keep asking people until they tell me the answer that I'm looking for, because the answer that you gave me isn't the answer that I want to hear. I recently went through this with the colony breeding Boolean conversation.
And social media fosters that.
15 years and showed them.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
If you're going to be asking opinions, something like it becomes a matter of like disrespect that like doesn't want to take what you say seriously or doesn't want to listen to what you say. Just fine. Like, if you don't want to hear what I have to say, but like, then don't ask my opinion either. Like, it's weird.
Yeah. There's a lot of that, you know, I heard, can you substantiate it? And then, you know, I mean, I've always talked people out of birds more than I've ever talked them into a bird. Like, I don't have to talk them into a bird. If they've done their research and they come to me and they're willing to learn, that's great. But I have to send people away, much more so, because that, you know, and I know Jordan's laughing because he has to deal with this with lorries all the time, because people think, well, look, I saw a lorry pellet, so that's easy. No, that's not appropriate.
No, it's not.
My vet said you could do that. No, that's not appropriate.
It's not just that. It's just it pertains to any bird. You know, what's the number one question that we get asked as breeders who do offer birds into the pet trade? For me, it's, can it talk?
I was just about to say, does it talk? How old before they start talking?
Yes, that is the number one reason, or I guess one of the top 10 reasons why people want a bird. And like Jason said, I try to talk people into not getting a bird. I'll ask them questions. Why do you want a lorry? Do you know about their diet? Are you aware of the projectile droppings? You know, that just things like that. And I have had a lot of people turn away because they want a bird for all the wrong reasons, you know. And you have the AR nuts and the rescue people, not all, but you know, you have these rescues and AR nuts that use these experiences against us in a way, and they look at all the bad apples instead of, you know, what actually goes on behind breeding birds, what the challenges are, sterilizing equipment, keeping things clean to prevent viruses, bacterial infections, all of that. It's all of that plays a part. You know, there's a chemistry behind it. It's not so black and white. And, you know, it's frustrating because it's like, we can say this all we want in a way. We can keep repeating it and beating this dead horse. But there's always going to be somebody that's going to want a bird for all the wrong reasons. And there's always going to be somebody that thinks that we're wrong for what we're doing, you know, but I think that we just need to be persistent and just keep putting it out there that no, this is not the case. And, you know, who knows what'll happen. But yeah, a lot of these problems just stem from people in the pet industry, you know, in the pet world, and the rescues and the anti-breeder agenda. So
yeah, and it's bigger than that. It's just the mentality of some people is, well, I'll get whatever I want, and then screw the consequences, right? I mean,
right.
I mean, I taught for years. I saw what kids came from, and you know, there was times where I'm like, oh, this horrible family situation, like this isn't how it should be for this poor kid, you know. So, you know, knowing that people make bad choices, which is always going to happen, that's never going to change. Knowing that they're going to be getting, you know, animals that they shouldn't, or having children that they shouldn't, or they're purchasing automobiles that they shouldn't, whatever it may be, is the human condition, and our job is to limit that as much as possible by educating them. And that's why anyone that kind of, you know, disregards education as not an answer to the problem, it hasn't been paying attention. And so, you know, that's why we do things like this. This is why I speak to bird groups all over the place, so that we can do better. And that source of education needs to come from, you know, wherever people are sourcing a bird. It doesn't matter where. That education has to come from sourcing the bird. Some challenges, since we're going long here, some challenges that we've all seen is infertility, DIS, which is dead in shell, incompatible pairs. You know, you can put pairs together and they may appear compatible, but they're not. And that's a process. With our asaris, they're so aggressive to each other. I have to put a male in a howdy cage inside of the aviary with the female, give them some time to get to know each other, then do that, like Jordan said, you know, observe them when they do interact and see what happens, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be compatible. And so then you have to split them up, introduce different individuals. I mean, it's a time-consuming process. You know, and nestling mortality, it's going to happen. Chicks are going to die. That is nature. That is just what happens in the wild. You know, in college, I studied infanticide, where among birds, where different bird species would kill their chicks and feed them to their other chicks. I mean, it happens. It sounds gross, but that's nature. And so we do everything we can to combat that, but you know, you can only do so much. And if you're breeding outdoors, predators, weather, potential for disease and things like that. The picture all the way to the right is my aviary run. And if you look carefully, you'll see a squirrel hanging on the side there. You know, so, you know, we had to put up hot wire, which I know I have a picture of, so that it kept the rodents off of the aviaries, and it works perfectly. It's you know, it's awesome. And all it does is deter them and you know, helps move them along. One of the biggest challenges right now, like Jordan said, was sourcing unrelated or, you know, or rare birds. It's hard to find many of the birds that we had bred before. And I'm living proof of that. It's really difficult to source unrelated birds that are not that common. And you're facing that with Lori's, Jordan, and I know, you know, Tiffany has faced it with different birds. It's a thing, and it's true.
Yeah.
You know, but we have cameras, which is that left picture. We have cameras in the nest, and those are 2 Aracari eggs there. So at least we can kind of keep an eye on what's going on. But if they get it in their head to do something, nothing we can do except pull what's in there, and then, you know, raise it ourselves. Yeah, here's the hot wire. So we have one along the ground and one up higher for, you know, if there was a raccoon or something like that. But this it's it's easy to maintain. It doesn't injure anybody. It just gives them a pop, and they learn real quickly what to do and what not to do, and then they go away. So
I've seen it pop Jason a number of times.
yes,
In fact.
I have accidentally touched it, and the hair on my neck just stood up because
he
your
screamed. He
condition,
screamed
yeah.
like a little girl.
Oh, yeah.
Jason, is that insect netting to keep flies and stuff out?
Yeah. So what we have, because of where I am in Florida, we have, and because I know an entomologist who knows where mosquito populations are, we're near a pretty heavy mosquito populated area. And so we have everything wrapped in mosquito netting just as a precaution.
Yeah.
We don't actually see a ton of them, but I want to limit West Nile disease because I have some species that are more susceptible than others. So that's just mesh on the outside of the wire. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, we have a mosquito issue here too, but the other thing is flies. So
Yeah.
that's why I asked, because I need to do something here for that.
Yeah. I mean, most bugs would make their way in and get eaten by a lot of the species that I keep. So probably not a huge deal. They're not going to get West Nile from eating a mosquito, but you know, as a precaution, because I'm dealing with these birds that are rare, I wrapped everything in mosquito netting. So successes. The one on the left is one of our first Sierra parakeets that Tiffany's hand rearing right now. Very exciting. They are the cutest damn birds that I've ever worked with. They are just amazing.
And please note that when Tiffany breeds Sierra parakeets, she also manages to have ones with round heads.
Well, I didn't breed these. Jason bred these.
Yeah, these are bred by me, but she's hand rearing them.
She breeds
mine are freeloaders. They're not doing anything.
Because that is the roundest little head I have ever seen.
So cute.
Yeah, they are amazing little birds, and to watch the pairs, watching the pairs, they're just really interesting to watch. They're South American birds. They're not like budgies, but they're just they're really interesting. We'll have to talk. We'll do an episode on some of the species that we raise and give them more visibility. But that was some of the success that we had, as well as the green Aracari that I'm hand rearing right now. And I'll let Jordan go next.
I am currently raising a couple of Duvenbode lories or Duvenbodes or brown lories. It depends on how you want to pronounce it.
I like Duvenbodes.
Duvenbode.
Yeah, right. A couple of black lory babies. I left a blue crown lory baby outside for the parents to rear. I have various.
You recently hatched.
That I recently hatched.
Yeah, I think you said that like you let the parents incubate.
Oh yeah. That was a chattering lory, a yellowback chattering lory.
Okay.
Yeah. So that one's still doing well. And then I've raised a couple of different trichoglossus species, rainbows, the Webbers this year, Edwards, ornates. I'm trying to think because there's quite a few of them, but I do have a fertile blue streaked egg in the incubator, so I hope that one hatches out.
That's exciting.
Because I do need a male now, because it's so hard to find males, and I can't seem to find one that's unrelated or even one that exists. I did buy one earlier this year, or was it late last year? And it was an old bird and he only lasted 2 weeks here. So unfortunately I lost him, and he was a male. And he was an unrelated bird. So I do have a sibling pair that is now 2 years old, and I can't find an unrelated bird. So I'm hoping that Chris raises some this year, so that there will be some sort of unrelated blood to implement, whether I'll swap with her or something. So yeah, I hope it's a male if it hatches out, and we'll see.
And I want to reiterate this. All of the species Jordan just listed were very common in the 80s and 90s. And now you cannot find them. They're very, very rare. And this is happening with many, many, many different species of parrot, especially in particular. So, you know, we need more people invested in aviculture to be producing genetically viable populations of these birds. And lories are a really prime example. So I applaud Jordan for all the heartache that he's going through raising these birds, because it's rough. It's rough.
And this isn't going to be really popular with a lot of people, but if you're a rescue and you have some of these species and you aren't putting them into breeding programs, you're shoving them in pet homes, especially if they're not tame, you are not doing anybody any favors. You know, these are not birds that are coming into rescues by the dozens. They're just not.
Right.
There's no reason that they shouldn't be in a good breeding program so that we have more of them in case something happens.
I mean, I would love it if we were overpopulated with these species, because that would, you know, that would definitely help me out in a way, you know, but that's just simply not the case. You know, not too long ago, I came across an ad on a rescue website, and they had a Forstons lorikeet, not tame at all, but they want it to go into a pet home, and they want you to do all these absurd things like a home visit, a home video, you know, show us all your bedrooms in your house. Who wants to do that? You know, that's just, it's insane to me. And there would be no pet birds if it weren't for people breeding them, period. And a lot of people just fail to realize that. You know, they think these birds are so easy to import or you know, get in general, and that's not the case at all. You know, we're not talking about budgies or finches or zebra finches or cockatiels. You know, we're talking about
that's what's about going to be left here in about 10 years for pets too. I don't think people realize
that all or nothing mentality. That doesn't work. That doesn't work for anybody. And wanting to eliminate all birds. I don't want to live without birds. I
don't either. And I don't, you know, again, I don't care who it bothers. I like having my birds. They add a lot to my life. I think I provide them a good home. They're good for my grandkids to grow up, you know, loving birds. And I want my granddaughters to be able to enjoy them someday too. I don't feel guilty about having birds at all, nor should anybody. You should feel guilty if you have animals and you don't take care of them. But you absolutely should not feel guilty for having an animal that you take good care of.
And Tiffany,
say it again for the people in the back.
Yep.
You should.
And Tiffany, go ahead with tell us what you have here.
So the far right is a dark factor green marble parrotlet. So this is the first year that I've produced dark factors. And then right to the left of him is this is a mouthful, cinnamon turquoise pied kakariki. So that's my very first Spangled kakariki. It's an edged mutation, similar to the marble mutation in the parrot, where there's like a reduction in eumelanin in the feather shaft so that it's partial, and they get this kind of like scalloped edge on their feathers, and it just lightens them in general. You can see the difference in color easily. And then to the left of that, this is a 2-year project of mine to produce misty kakarikis, because the only ones that we really have in the US, there might be 1 or 2 out there, but not common. They're all turquoise, because again, they imported turquoise and they just bred all the turquoise together. So it took me 2 years.
Tiffany, what, and a lot of people don't know this, but part of that reason that they did that was because you can't bring normal green wild type birds across the border in Canada from Canada, right?
I believe so, yes, because
so
they
breeding
have
the mutations is all we like. When I brought in linealated parakeets from Europe in the early 2000s, we couldn't breed. They wouldn't let us bring in normal green wild type birds. It was all mutations, and so that's part of the issue.
Yeah, I think even with the kakarikis that were originally brought in, I think they were pied. So they were either cinnamon green or pied green.
Yeah.
So that's why there's a lot of cinnamon prevalent in the dominant mutation. So it's easy to produce, but it's not easy to produce if you can't find a green bird to pair to your to your turquoise females that you have. And I have 2 Misty females, Misty turquoise, but my other female, for whatever reason, she was the first one I tried to breed, and like out of both of her, like 8 out of the 10 eggs had double yolks. Just strange. And I think that's one thing that you'll learn if you ever start breeding birds, is that oftentimes you'll get birds from other breeders because the breeders themselves are having issues with them. So I think this was likely a problem that's been happening with her from the beginning, because a twin yolk egg is normally not going to survive, and none of them did. They were fertile, but they didn't live. And then the single yolk eggs that I had from her didn't hatch. So this was my other Misty turquoise that I had. And I've gotten 3 Misty babies out of her. So the one on the left is a Misty green pied, and then the one in the middle is turquoise, and you can see that it compared to a normal turquoise. Because a lot of people look at it and they're like, oh, what, it's just a little bit darker. Well, I have Misty too. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. Like, it's a legit mutation. But yeah.
Sorry, I was muted.
I was like,
considerations for offspring. I think there's always a potential to send them to pet homes. That helps keep things going, as far as, providing for the birds and things like that. But there's other things too. With my birds, I have to keep in consideration, are there zoos or other education programs that want one of my birds hand reared so they can use it to educate the public? I have always made that a priority. I think that's important. The green Arasaris up here make great education program birds. That's what they look like when I pull them. Believe it or not, those are about 2 weeks old. Their eyes don't even open until after week 3. So, and you can see that little skid pad, their feet are off the ground. They're not perched on their feet. They sit on those little hocks there. But you can see they don't have any down feathers either. This is normal. So definitely a different kind of bird. And then some of them are going to go to breeding situations where they're unrelated. They have novel genes. We want to make sure that, they're paired with an unrelated bird so that they can, produce genetically differentiated offspring. So lots of things to consider. I know that all of us are considering the same things with all of these different birds, whether it's the lories and the left and the right pictures, or the parrotlets, Tiffany's parrotlets in the middle. We're all considering, what happens to the birds when we move them. And then on top of that, what happens if a bird has to be given back? Like, I will take birds back. If they have to place them, they're going to give them away to somebody. I'd rather them come back to me because I know how to take care of them, and then I can place them. But it's going to cost me money, because then I have to disease test them before I, bring them back in, get them a wellness check from a vet, and have a look at their blood work and things like that. So it's always going to cost me money to take birds back. But I will take any bird back, with that understanding that it's going to cost me money, and that I can't pay for the bird after it's coming back, because it's going to cost me so much to take that bird back in. Do you have similar?
You get that with rehoming too, where people, I'm giving you my bird for free. Well, not really, not by the time we're done taking it to the vet and finding a foster home and feeding it and lotta.
Yeah.
It's never free.
Yeah. I implement that when I do sell to a pet home. I have a contract that they will read through and sign if they agree with the terms and conditions. And I do have that implemented that if things don't work out, or even, you know, a year or two later, they decide that, or if some life-changing thing happens, whether they're moving and they don't have the space anymore, or if they just don't have the time for the bird, I will take that bird back. I will, you know, because like Jason said, I know how to take care of it. I know the ropes. And I would rather it come back to me than it go to someone that doesn't know absolutely anything, you know, about how to take care of them.
I have some dachshunds I need to rehome if anyone knows anyone interested. Yeah, I wanted to bring that up too, just because for people who just want to haphazardly breed because they think it's cute, but then they don't consider, like, now I've got, you know, 13 babies and I don't have 13 cages for them. And I don't know, you know, then they're contacting me, hey, do you know anyone looking for a baby right now? So, you know, I just think that's something you have to consider. Like, yeah, babies are cute, but you have to be prepared to, like, have somewhere to put
Right.
them.
Right. Yeah, I get people too that will ask me, you know, do you have a pair of this or that for sale? And number one, I usually don't sell pairs because, you know, Lorries only lay 2 eggs per clutch, you know, and I don't have 3 or 4 different lines of the same species to make pairs with, you know. So it's hard enough for me to make pairs myself. There's no way that I'm going to do all this work for somebody else when I could just keep the pair myself, you know. And it's not saying that I never would, but yeah, it's I do get people that will ask me, I want to, or tell me, I want to breed a pair of rainbow lorgeets. Okay, do you know how to artificially incubate if your pair won't do it themselves? Excuse me, themselves. Do you know how to hand feed if they're not going to feed they end up not feeding their babies? Do you have medicine on hand? You know, do you have syringes? Do you have this, that? Do you know how to check? You know, do you know what the proper formula temperature is so they don't burn their crops? You know, there's all those questions that I end up asking them that they haven't asked themselves.
Yep.
So on top of all of that, we have costs, right? And it is not cheap. It is not cheap at all.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, care for adult pairs, especially when it comes to housing and diet. You know, I know my diet prep on the right side with those oval white bowls and stainless steel bowls, like that's every day. There's no cutting corners. There's no shortcuts. There's no, oh, I can skip this today and just give them dry food. That doesn't exist. So, and then knowing, you know, all these different bowls are going to different species, or free feeding, you know, the mixed aviaries. So knowing what all of those birds need, monitoring when food is depleted so that you can adjust how much you're feeding based on what the different birds need. It is a process, and there's lots of note taking and observation and things like that. I have some species that have to be DNA sexed, like the Sierra parakeets, and then I have some species like the green arasaris who are dimorphic. Males have a black head, females have a brown head. But regardless, I have to use genetic techniques to sex birds, test them for disease to make sure that everything is disease-free here. The unforeseen medical costs, you know, one bird having an emergency can cost you upwards of $1,000. And, you know, you just have to be prepared for that. And then having emergency plans in place. I know we've just seen a couple of examples of sanctuaries / rehomers that didn't have an emergency plan in place and birds died tragically. I've never seen that with breeders, because usually there's other people working, you know, with them. So they have other people on site. But, you know, that those emergency plans are important if something happens to you, so that, you know, somebody can take care of those birds and get them what they need.
I'll tell you a quick story about an emergency plan that was something that I had never even considered before that happened to me. And it was just one of those things where it's like, I can't predict the future, and it's just not something that I ever crossed my mind. I was hand feeding green cheek conures and a hurricane blew through. and I lost power. And it was then that I realized that I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to heat up water for the formula. And I believe it was Chris Touchton who gave me the idea to boil water and put it in a few Yeti thermoses, cups that I had. And if I hadn't even thought to like ask someone or, you know, be prepared, I don't know what I would have done, because I had no way to heat up water. And that hurricane knocked out our power for at least 11 hours, I think. And that saved my birds. So that, you know, just something that like, you know, I think you just take for granted that you can just quickly, you know, microwave a cup of water, or I use like an electric kettle now, but like that's stuff that you kind of just take for granted and don't think about.
Yeah, was it last year? The beginning of 2021 here, when that big old big snowstorm flew through.
Oh yeah.
I had to use we lost power. I had to use an inverter and go to my car and plug in basically one of my brooders. And I was incubating an egg in the brooder because I couldn't, the incubator would suck too much power. So there wasn't enough power to use through the inverter for it to operate, you know, properly. So yeah, having things like that, or just, you know, things like that on hand for when some freak accident or, you know, weather event does happen, you know, you're prepared. So yeah. I sat in my car for like 5 to 6 hours sitting in there, keeping warm. Yeah, it was crazy.
And it's what you don't expect, because you're in Texas, for crying out Pete's sake.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean,
I know.
You wouldn't expect that type of thing to happen.
Right.
You know, we have crates set up, and we have in a shed, and we have what's it called? A generator, so that if stuff like that happens, I can keep the basics going.
Right.
And, you know, with our birds, with, you know, if we have extreme heat, we have misters and manual sprinklers out there, so that we can, you know, give them what they need. They also have access to a full pond and fountain and all that sort of thing too. So, I mean, they have what they need, but just having that stuff ready to go just in case is always something you have to think about. So.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we talked a lot of people out of breeding with the truth. There's a lot that goes into it.
Barely scratched the surface too.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it, and we'll have further opportunities to talk about this. But you know, if questions come up, post them where you see them, or reach out to us at realsquawk.com. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. So take care, and we will see you next time.
Bye.